If you're resentful about something, well, first of all, you should notice, I'm resentful. And that's kind of humiliating because no one's proud of being resentful. It's a shameful emotion. Well, so then why are you resentful? Well, there's only two reasons as far as I've been able to tell. One is that you're allowing yourself to be taken advantage of, or you're being taken advantage of. Sometimes you're not allowing yourself. Sometimes you're a child being abused by their uncle. You're not allowing yourself. You can't do anything about it. You're resentful because you're being taken advantage of or because you're immature. It's one of those two things. Figure out which it is and then take the steps necessary to address it. Living a life without resentment is a great goal. People are often resentful if they see that responsibility has been abdicated. Why isn't that person doing their job? It's like, well, hey man, step in at your workplace, in your family. You know, and you think, well, I shouldn't have to do that extra work. Well, you shouldn't be a slave. You shouldn't allow yourself to be tyrannized. But if something bugs you because a responsibility is going unfulfilled, there's a great opportunity for you. And this is something I don't think we teach young people well. And one of the things, you may remember this, that was so striking about the tour was that I made a case fairly consistently that most people find the meaning that sustains them through the vicissitudes of life, not in happiness, but in responsibility. And that would bring everyone to a halt. It would always make the whole theater silent. It's like, oh, I never thought of that connection. Because maybe you want to avoid responsibility, and you can understand why. You can understand why. You hide from it. That is what you encounter if you go out in the world. You think, who the hell wants that? I don't want the responsibility. It's like, well, yes, you do, as it turns out. There's nothing better than responsibility. Now, you know, I say that with some caution. I think that it's hard to say. The responsibility, I've been overwhelmed by my apparent responsibility, but I think it's also kept me alive. And I mean that literally. And so,
wait, can you go a little deeper with that? I mean, when you were at your darkest moments in the last 2 years, whatever that might be, was it the feeling of the...
many times in the last year where it would have been much easier for me just to be dead. That's constant. So, but no.
But is it but no because of something in you, or is it but no because of the people that you would have abdicated that responsibility of the people, or is that ultimately the same thing?
It.
Yeah.
Well, I do think the two aren't easily distinguishable, but it's definitely that. It's definitely that. You know. And it's one of the chapters. The last chapter is be grateful in spite of your suffering. You know, you need a meaning to sustain you through suffering, and it is the case that you find that in responsibility. Well. And so it's good advice for anyone who's at work. You're resentful about this and that because people aren't pulling their weight. Pull it. See what happens. You become indispensable instantly. You'll know everything. And maybe that job won't be for you, or maybe that relationship won't be for you, but you'll take your hard acquired wisdom and go elsewhere and flourish there. So, you know, this kid stopped me. I think I wrote about this in this book. Kid stopped me in a restaurant one day when I was walking in, and he said, and he had an undergraduate degree, and he was working as a waiter in a chain steak place. And he stopped me and he said, you know, about 6 months ago, I was watching one of your lectures and I decided to stop being resentful about my job. And he was resentful because he had a university degree and he was working as a waiter. You know, and look, I don't have anything against waiters. It's like a waiter can make your evening, you know, hooray. He said, well, I decided I'd start trying at my job, like really trying as if it was worthwhile. He said he got 3 promotions in 6 months, like he's just rocketing up the power hierarchy. Well, it's not power, it's competence if it's well run. You know, and places are full of opportunity. There's always people out there who are doing far better than you on pretty much anything you want to imagine. And if all you're doing is seeing yourself in their reflected light, let's say, then it's going to be pretty damn dismal. But it's not a good comparison because, well, first of all, there's danger in just comparing yourself to others, period, because they're not you. And God only knows what struggles they had to undertake to get to where they were, or what burdens they're currently carrying that you're not aware of. But you can certainly contrast yourself with yourself. And that's a lot better. It is the only way. Well, it's also the only way of really of really measuring anything approximating proper improvement. You can actually tell when you're a little better than you were yesterday.
Right.
And you can actually do that. That's another thing that's so interesting about it, is that you can actually make yourself a little better in some way, pretty much. Well, I don't know if it's at every moment, but you can certainly do it every day. Let's say you want to become who you could be in the fullest sense. So let's say you're someone who's going to solve some serious problems. Okay, the first thing you have to do is admit to the seriousness of the problems. That's no joke. And so the first thing is just the terror of the problem itself. And that's enough to paralyze you. And that's the Hydra, that's the Gorgon with the head of snakes. It'll paralyze and turn you to stone. That's the basilisk in the Harry Potter series. You look at it and it turns you to stone and lurks underneath everything, right? And it's malevolence and tragedy. And so there's that. And then the next is, well, you're going to take responsibility for that? You're really going to do that, are you? That's a hell of a load, man. And so it's daunting to even consider that. And then there's the discipline and responsibility that necessitates, which is also daunting. It's like, oh my God, the problem's that serious. I'm really going to have to get my act together in order to not contribute to it, much less solve it. And so the problem is terrible. And then the solution is daunting. But the upside of that is like, well, there isn't anything better to have than a problem that's worth solving, like that's really worth solving. Right. And so the more of that you take on, the more you have a reason to get out of bed in the morning, no matter what. Like, I'm getting up, I'm trudging forward. Doesn't matter what I'm suffering from. I've got things that need to be done. They're necessary. And that gives you that sense of purpose that is the antidote to bitterness. Okay, well, let's say you want your life to be meaningful. It's like, okay, then what you do matters. It actually matters. Or how starting to clean up the room changed their life. That's quite fun because it's something I always tell people to do instead of going out and protesting. Jesus, I just can't stand
Cleaning up
that.
the room?
Yeah.
Meaning?
Well, my sense is that if you want to change the world, you start from yourself and work outward because you build your competence that way. It's like, I don't know how you can go out and protest the structure of the entire economic system if you can't keep your room organized. Well, I made a video call, which was called Message to Millennials, where it was called How to Change the World Properly. A bit of it on the pretentious side, I suppose, but I was trying to produce something that was a counterposition to this idea that what you should do is go out and fix up other people. You know, that's just not right. And there's a New Testament line about that, something about, you know, not worrying too much about the log in your neighbor's eye, or about the speck in your neighbor's eye when you have a log in your eye. What would the world be like if people stopped avoiding the things they knew they should do? You know, because the question is, how much are we contributing to the fact that life is an existential catastrophe and a tragedy? How much is our own corruption contributing to that? That's a really worthwhile question. The things you leave undone because you're angry, you're resentful, you're lazy, you have inertia. Well, you consult your conscience and it says, well, you know, that place over there could use a little work. It's the same as working on yourself, and so you clean that up because you can. And then things are a little clearer around you. And you're a little better off because you've practiced a bit. And so you're a little stronger, and then something else manifests itself and says, well, maybe you could like take a crack at fixing me up too. So you decide to do that. And then that gets a little bit more pristine, you know, and soon, and it's humble because you're not exceeding your domain of competence. You know, it's like, don't be fixing up the economy, 18-year-olds. You don't know anything about the economy. It's a massive, complex machine beyond anyone's understanding, and you mess with it at your peril. So, and can you even clean up your own room? No. Well, you should think about that. You should think about that. It's not an accident that the axiomatic Western individual is someone who was unfairly nailed to a cross and tortured. It's like, yes! Right, exactly. So what do you do about that? Well, I thought about that for a long time too. It's like, well, you don't get together in a damn mob, because all that does is allow you to be as horrible as you could possibly imagine and suffer from none of the consequences. That's a bad idea. So how about we don't do that? Well, there's a deep idea in the West too. It's like, pick up your damn suffering and bear it. And try to be a good person so you don't make it worse. Well, that's a truth. You know, I read a lot about
the terrible things that people have done to each other. You just cannot even imagine it. It's so awful. So you don't want to be someone like that. Now, do you have a reason to be? Yes. You have lots of reasons to be. God, there's reasons to be resentful about your existence. Everyone you know is going to die. You know, you too. And there's going to be a fair bit of pain along the way, and lots of it's going to be unfair. It's like, yeah, no wonder you're resentful. It's like, act it out and see what happens. You make everything you're complaining about infinitely worse. There's this idea that hell is a bottomless pit, and that's because no matter how bad it is, some stupid son of a bitch like you could figure out a way to make it a lot worse. So you think, well, what do you do about that? Well, you accept it. That's what life is like. It's suffering. That's what the religious people have always said. Life is suffering. Yes. Well, who wants to admit that? Well, just think about it. Well, so what do you do in the face of that suffering? Try to reduce it. Start with yourself. What good are you? Get yourself together, for Christ's sake, so that when your father dies, you're not whining away in a corner, and you can help plan the funeral, and you can stand up solidly so that people can rely on you. That's better. Don't be a damn victim. Of course you're a victim. Jesus, obviously. Put yourself together. And then maybe if you put yourself together, you know how to do that. You know what's wrong with you, if you'll admit it. You know there's a few things you could like polish up a little bit, that you might even be able to manage in your insufficient present condition. And so you might shine yourself up a little bit, and then your eyes will be a little more open, then you can shine yourself up a little bit more, and then maybe you could bring your family together instead of having them be the hateful, spiteful, neurotic, infighting batch that... So then you fix yourself up a little bit, kind of humbly, because, you know, God, you're a fixer-upper if there ever was one. And then you got to figure out, well, can you figure out how to make peace with your idiot brother? And probably not, because he's just as dumb as you, so how the hell are you going to manage that? And so then maybe you get somewhere that way, and your family's sort of functioning, and you find out, well, that kind of relieved a little bit of suffering, although it reduced the opportunities for spiteful revenge, and that's kind of a pain in the neck. And so then you get your family together a little bit, and you're a little clued in then, at least a bit, because you've done something difficult that's actually difficult. You're a little wiser, and so then maybe you could put a tentative finger out beyond the family and try to change some little thing without wrecking it. It's like, our society is complex, and we teach our students that they could just fix it. It's like, go fix a military helicopter and see how far you get with that. It's like, what are you going to do? You're like a chimp with a wrench. Whack! Oh, look, it's better. It's like, no, it's not better. Things are complicated, and to fix things is really hard, and you have to be like a golden tool to fix things, and you're not. So, and that's the other message of the West. It's like, how do you overcome the suffering of life? And I'm not saying it's only the message of the West. How do you overcome the suffering of life? Is be a better person. That's how you do it. Well, that's hard. It takes responsibility. And I think, you know, if you said to someone, you want to have a meaningful life? Everything you do matters. That's the definition of a meaningful life. But everything you do matters. So you're going to have to carry that with you. Or do you want to just forget about the whole meaning thing, and then you don't have any responsibility, because who the hell cares, and you can wander through life doing whatever you want, gratifying impulsive desires for how useful that's going to be, and you're stuck in meaninglessness, but you don't have any responsibility. Which one do you want? Well, ask yourself, which one are you pursuing? And you'll find very rapidly that it isn't the majority of your soul that's pursuing the whole meaning thing, because, well, look what you have to do that. You have to take on the fact that life is suffering. You have to put yourself together in the face of that. Well, that's hard. Christ, it's amazing people can even do it. I'm stunned every day when I go outside, and it isn't a riot with everything burning. Because really, God, you talk to people, it's like, I knew this guy, he'd been in a motorcycle accident, and it really ruined him, and he was like a linesman, you know, working on the power, and he was working with someone who had Parkinson's disease, and they had complementary inadequacies, and so two of them could do the job of one person, and so they're out there fixing power lines in the freezing cold, despite the fact that one was 3/4 wrecked with a motorcycle accident and the other one had Parkinson's. It's like That's how our civilization works. It's like there's all these ruined people out there. They've got problems like you can't believe. Off they go to work and do things they don't even like, and look, the lights are on. My God, it's unbelievable. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. And we're so ungrateful. College students, the postmodern types, they're so ungrateful. You know, they don't know that they're surrounded by just a bloody miracle. It's a miracle that all this stuff works, that all you crazy chimpanzees that don't know each other can sit in the same room for 2 hours sweltering away without tearing each other apart, because that's what chimps do. So anyways, so what happened? Well, I made some videos and I got to the bottom of some things, at least as far as I can tell, so I told you what the bottom is, and then I got this idea about what you might do about it, which isn't my idea. It's not my idea. It's an old idea. It's far older than Christianity. It's old. It's the oldest story of mankind. Get yourself together. Transcend your suffering. See if you can be some kind of hero. Make the suffering in the world less. Well, that's the way forward, as far as I can tell, if there is any way forward. You know, not everybody is equipped to or interested in engaging in high-level discussion of abstract and creative ideas. You know, you hear this idea that everyone's creative. That's a lie. It's as straightforward as that. True creativity is very, very rare. And so, and if you happen to be a creative person, or if you happen to be someone who's profoundly interested in ideas, you are in a pronounced minority, just as you are if you happen to be extremely extroverted or extremely agreeable or extremely conscientious. These are minority issues, and what you do is you find like-minded people who are capable of engaging that. You know, heavyweight weightlifters compete with heavyweight weightlifters for a reason, and everyone thinks that's fine, and the same thing applies to intellectual and creative endeavors. So what you do is you try to find a community where that's the nature of the community, and you likely have to find a relationship like that as well, you know. So I don't think so. I think what contributes to the siloing is the arrogance that goes along with it, because if you can be interested in ideas and you can be creative. Well, that's the arrogance of the intellect, right? That's the thing the Catholic Church had warned about for centuries, is the arrogance of the intellect. So because if you're wise as well as smart, and there is no relationship between being smart and being wise, they are not the same thing. There's no quick pathway from smart to wise. And many of the people who I've known who were very wise well, some of them were intellectually impaired and were still wise, you know. So it's the arrogance that brings up the block. And I see this, for example, happening in the United States in particular, because the last time I went down there, for example, I had friends down there, and some of those friends are very, very smart people, and some of them were talking about the Trump voters, and they were talking about the Trump voters with contempt. And I thought, you better watch that, because that's 50% of the damn population. And it might be convenient to think that they're stupid and beneath you, but it's not conducive to a civil state, and there's no evidence that it's true, because there isn't a straight line between intelligent and wise. And so I think that if your character is developed and you're intelligent, you can have your siloed creative community, but you develop enough wisdom so that you can see all the things that people can do that are of high ethical utility, that are outside the intellectual domain. You know, and I think that's why in the New Testament, I think that's why Christ is a carpenter. Right? Because, well, first of all, a carpenter is one of those jobs that when you're dishonest, it manifests itself immediately, because what you build falls down. And so if you're an honest carpenter, you build a good house. So there's a nice metaphor there. But it's also a warning, in some sense, against the equation of intellectual brilliance with moral superiority. And so if the intellects would drop their moral superiority, and fat chance there is of that, then the divide between the working class, say, and the elite would resolve. And there's every reason to have respect for decent working class people. I mean, it's on their labor, as the left-wingers at least hypothetically agree that the entire edifice of the culture is resting. So you can have your cake and eat it too, but you have to not assume that your niche makes you superior. And it's very difficult for smart people, especially smart. There's this scene in Nietzsche's, it's in Thus Spake Zarathustra, where Zarathustra, the prophet, comes down from the mountain and he comes into a public square, and there's this crowd around this little midget who's only about this high, who has a gigantic ear, and everyone is marveling at him. Well, that's what the modern intellect is like. It's a midget with a giant, well, mouth generally, not an ear. And the being is underdeveloped, but the intellect is hyper activated, and it makes the person extraordinarily unbalanced. And it's partly because they can't compete outside the intellectual realm, and that makes them very bitter, because they tend to think, well, God, I'm so smart, everything should just come to me. It's like, sorry, that's not how the world works. And it also that attitude is immediately evident to people that they're talking to when they talk in the manner that they talk, if they are arrogant intellectuals of that sort. You see that in The Simpsons did a good job of that with Comic Book Guy, right? I mean, he completely useless in every possible dimension with an IQ of about 160, and it's very annoying to people who have an IQ of 160 that they can also be completely useless, but it happens a lot. So yeah. I worked with this crazy psychologist. He used to put jokes on his multiple choice tests. He was a really eccentric guy, but I really liked his courses. He taught a course on creativity, and he was also a prison psychologist, and he was an eccentric guy, and he for some reason liked me, and maybe because I was eccentric too, and he invited me to go out to the Edmonton maximum security prison with him a couple of times, which I did, and that was a very interesting experience, because I was trying to figure out what role each individual's behavior bore to the pathology of the group. It was something like that. And I went out there and I met a little guy, smaller than me. I was a little bigger by then. And he was a pretty innocuous guy. And what had happened was I was out in this gymnasium. It looks like a high school, a prison, which is really quite telling in my estimation. And there were all these like monsters in there weightlifting, and like they were monsters. I remember one guy was tattooed everywhere, and he had like a huge scar running down the middle of his chest. It looked like someone had hit him with an axe, and you know, and I was in there, and I had this weird cape that I used to wear that I bought in Portugal, and some boots that went along with it. And yeah, it was like an 1890s Sherlock Holmes cape, and it was really like it was from the 1890s, because this little village was up on a hill. It was a walled city on a hill, and they sold these things, and I don't think they'd changed the style since 1890, and so I thought they were really cool, and so I was wearing that, which wasn't perhaps the most conservative garb to don if you're going to go to a maximum security prison. So anyways, I was in the gymnasium, and the psychologist left, and God only knows, I mean, that's what he was like, and all these guys came around me, you know, and they were offering to trade their prison clothes for my cape, and it was it was like I was being made an offer I couldn't refuse, you know, and so I didn't really know what to do. And then this little guy said something like that the psychologist sent me to come and take you away, or something like that. And so I thought, well, better this little guy than all these monsters. So we went outside the gym through some doors, like school doors. We went outside the gym into the exercise yard, I guess, and we were wandering along, and he was talking to me, and he seemed like a kind of an innocuous guy. And then the psychologist showed up at the door and motioned us back, okay? And so, which was kind of a relief. And so I went into his office, and he said, you know that guy that you walked out in the yard with? And I said, yeah. He said, he took 2 cops one night, and he had them kneel down, and while they were begging for their lives, he shot them both in the back of the head. And I thought, see, the thing that was so interesting was that he was so innocuous, right? Because what you'd hope is that someone like that would be very much unlike you, let's say, and certainly wouldn't be like someone innocuous that you'd met. What you'd want is that the guy would be like, you know, half werewolf and half vampire, so you could just tell right away that he was a cold-blooded killer. But no, he was this sort of ineffectual little guy who was certainly not ineffectual if you gave him a revolver and the upper hand. And so So that made me think a lot about the relationship between being innocuous and being dangerous. And then another thing happened. I met another guy out there, and then a week or two later I heard that he and a friend of his had held another guy down and pulverized his left leg with a lead pipe, like just pulverized it. And the reason for that was that they thought that he was a snitch, and maybe he was. And that time I did something different. Instead of being shocked and horrified by that, although I certainly was, I thought, how in the world could you do that? Because I didn't think I could do that. I didn't think that. I thought that there was a qualitative distinction between me and those people. And so I spent about 2 weeks trying to see if I could figure out under what conditions I could do that. Like what kind of psychological transformation I would have to undergo to be able to do that. And so that was a meditative exercise, let's say. And it only took about 10 days for me to realize that not only could I do that, that it would be a hell of a lot easier than I thought it would be. And that's sort of where that wall between me and what Jung described as the shadow started to fall apart. And that also was very useful because I started to treat myself as a somewhat different entity, because I hadn't been aware up to that point, because I thought I was a good guy. And there's no reason for me to think that, because you're not a good guy unless you've really made a bloody effort to be a good guy. You're just not. It's not easy. And so you're probably a moderately bad guy. And that's a long ways from being an absolutely horrible guy, but it's also a long ways from being a good guy. And so, but I had a little more respect for myself after that, because I also understood that there was a monstrous element to the human psyche that you needed to respect. And that was part of you, that you should regard yourself in some sense as a loaded weapon. It's very useful around children to regard yourself as a loaded weapon, because around children you are a loaded weapon. And the terrible experiences that many children have with their parents are testament to that. Are you depressed, or do you just have a horrible life? And those are not the same question, because if you're depressed, you have a life that in principle should work, but isn't. And so you come and say, look, I've got a lot of things going for me. I've got a good job, I've got a good family, my wife loves me, but man, I'm miserable all the time. It's like, okay, well, let's delve into that a bit more deeply. But that kind of sounds like depression. But then you might come and say, well, I'm miserable, I'm suffering, I don't even want to be alive. And then I might ask, well, do you have an intimate partner? Well, no, not really. And I have had a history of catastrophic relationships. Do you have any friends? Well, I have this one person I phone like once every month or so, but other than that, no, I don't really see anyone. Well, do you have any close family? No, my family's pretty fractured. I don't get along with my mom and dad. I don't see my sisters or my siblings much. It's like, well, how about a job, or how about a career, or failing that, a job? It's like, well, I've always kind of been underemployed, and I just lost my job, and that's not going very well, and so on. You can walk through someone's life and you can find out if they're reasonably embedded in a hierarchy of social institutions. And if the answer is no intimate partner, no family, no children, no friends, no job, no career, no educational pathway, no engagement in civic responsibility, let's say, no church attendance, no spiritual life, no routine. It's like, well, you're not depressed, you just have a horrible life. Multidimensionally. Like, it's no wonder you're depressed. There's nothing in your life that is working. But it's interesting because that's not exactly a diagnosis at the level of the individual. It's a diagnosis in relationship to the relationship between the individual and this structure of containing social institutions. If you don't have an intimate partner, and you don't have a family, and you don't have any friends, and you don't have a career or a job or any civic involvement or any involvement, let's say, with religious institutions, and you don't have any creative striving, all you've got left is pain. And so that's what you have. And so here's a different way of thinking about sanity. Sanity isn't being well constituted as an atomized individual. Sanity is what makes itself manifest if you're properly situated in a hierarchy of social order. To be well constituted, you have to be a harmonious player in a multidimensional symphony in some real sense of social interaction. It's very hard to stay on the straight and narrow without a partner who doesn't share your blind spots, correcting you constantly. You know, now that's annoying. There's a tussling about it, right? There's a fractious and adversarial element to that, because if you're married, you don't see eye to eye, and thank God for that, because sometimes in your foolish insistence on being right, you're wrong, and wrong in a way that'll take you out. And so you better have a partner who doesn't think the same way you do. And fortunately, if you have a partner, you have a partner who doesn't think the same way you do. And so if you can get the dialogue flowing, then that's a mutually corrective mechanism. And so then you might say, well, the truthful dialogue between partners in a marriage is actually, it's the process by which sanity itself is generated. And I mean technically, it's like you're too complex to regulate yourself, period. And so you need other people to help you do that. So if you have a wife or a husband, someone who knows you and is there for the long run, they can help, you can help each other find the meaningful path and stay on it. And you can't do that alone. And probably just having a partner isn't enough. You need kids, likely, to keep you sane or to drive you crazy, depending on the nature of your children. Let's say you need family, you need your parents, you need your siblings, you need another community around you that's not merely your wife, because you're so crazy that it takes a village to keep you sane. And so, and then surrounding that more intimate web of kinship, you need friends. And friends keep you sane. Well, how? Well, you have to act in a manner that makes them want to be around you to have friends. And that means that to maintain your friendships, you have to be saner than you really are, right? You have to be, they have to be able to enjoy their time with you. If you practice forthright and voluntary exposure to that which terrifies and dismays you, it transforms you. And we really know this as psychologists. We even know there's more and more evidence suggesting, for example, that if you imagine you adopt this attitude of voluntary confrontation, that changes you psychophysiologically. So much of the biochemistry of motivation and emotion is transformed when you take a stressor which could be oppressive and paralyze you and cause you to withdraw, and you reverse that and you decide to advance. It's like a different spirit inhabits you. And I mean this physiologically. There's a whole different pattern of being that makes itself manifest in you neurologically and psychophysiologically and pharmacologically. So you take it on as a challenge, right? And that transforms you at a cellular level too, because one of the things we've discovered in recent years is that if you do something new and complex, then that turns on that parts of your DNA that haven't produced proteins before will start producing new proteins and reconstruct you from the cellular level up. So it's a deep transformation, and we have no idea how deep. And again, you could ask yourself, if you didn't withdraw in fear from anything from everything that life threw at you, who could you become? And I would say that's the central religious question in some real deep sense. You know, are more things thrown at us than we can manage? Well, that's a tricky question, because pretty dreadful things are thrown our way. And you might say, well, that's just presents an insuperable barrier to progress. That's not very helpful, because you're alive, here you are, you got these problems to contend with, and if it's an impossible task, then how could you be anything but hopeless and desperate? But then you think, well, wait a second. How would things transform if I took this on as a voluntary adventure? You know, regardless of its scope, and the scope would include unjust suffering, death, and hell. And that's not just some religious or metaphysical vision. It's like, no, you're actually going to have to contend with that in your life, in whatever way those things make themselves manifest to you personally. That's coming, man. And so maybe you better get prepared. And then the question might be, well, what would happen if you got prepared? And the answer might be, you'd be prepared. And I think the religious enterprise in its deepest sense is that process of preparation. And you know, you might want to even push that a bit farther. You might say, well, not only do you want to get prepared for what's coming your way, but you want to be so prepared that when it comes your way, that it doesn't make you bitter and resentful and tempted by the desire to walk the path that would make all of that even worse. And so you might say, well, if you could really face up to what you need to face up to, not only could you turn yourself into someone that could bear the catastrophe of life and exposure to hell, but maybe you could turn yourself into someone who would still do good even while facing those things. And that's a pretty noble goal. So imagine you have a goal in mind. You want to get to work in the morning. I used to ask my students a question like this, is like, what? Maybe they're going to write an essay. Why are you writing the essay? Why are you in class? Well, I'm in class because I need this class because it's part of my major. Well, why did you pick a major like that? Well, I'm interested in psychology. Well, why did you come to get a degree? Well, I think I need a degree to get a job. Well, why do you need a job? Well, I need a job to keep body and soul together, and maybe to be productive, and maybe to, you know, establish a name for myself. And why do you want to do that? Well, because, you know, it's part and parcel of living properly. And why do you want to live properly? And well, then, and how would you live if you lived properly? And at that point, people are usually unable to answer, you know, because you can just push people with questions about why until they run out of explanations. But the point is that you're always doing whatever you're doing because what you're doing is nested in a sequence of goal-directed actions. And those can be more or less sophisticated. If you're not very sophisticated at all, the nesting might be like 2 structures deep. You know, maybe you're, I don't know, you're bored and you want to go get drunk, you know, and why? Well, because you don't want to be bored. And if someone pushes you a little farther than that, you hit them. And, you know, you don't want to delve into it. But if you're sophisticated, you have a pretty good hierarchy of answers. So you might say, well, why do you want to be a productive and generous citizen? And like I said, people usually bottom out there, but you could say, well, that's part of reciprocal altruism, and if I'm productive and generous, then that'll encourage other people to be productive and generous, and if we're all productive and generous together, then there'll be more for everyone, and we'll all get along better, and we'll get along for a longer period of time, and that'll make us all more stable, and that'll make our societies better. And then you might say, well, why is that relevant? You might say, well, because the alternative to that is something like a descent into something approximating hell, and so that's part of a reflection of the divine order and the eternal battle between good and evil. And then you could push it farther than that, and you could say, well, are you going to be on the side of the redemptive hero, or are you going to be on the side of the eternal adversary? Like, you can keep digging down farther and farther, and the farther down you dig, the more you get down into what you might describe as the implicit religious substrate. And it's very much useful to know that and to make as much of that conscious as possible. So now imagine that you've come to this talk tonight because you've decided to aim up. And maybe you haven't formulated that precisely explicitly, but something is driving you in this direction. And then you come to the talk and you find out that I'm talking about something that isn't what you expected, and it doesn't seem to be moving you along on your pathway forward to that end. And what's going to happen is you're going to be disappointed. And you might be anxious too. You're going to be disappointed because disappointment signals that you're experiencing something that's not relevant to the goal that you are attempting to pursue, and that might in fact be interfering with it. That's what negative emotion does. And maybe if you're disappointed in what I say, that also makes you anxious because you assumed that you would come here and I would say something relevant, because you assumed that you knew who I was, and then it turned out that I didn't, and then you don't know who I am, and then you don't know what you're doing here, and then you get anxious. And the reason you get anxious is because that's what anxiety is for. It tells you when the pathway to your goal has been disrupted, so multiple pathways have now emerged. So imagine you're driving your car to work and it quits. And what happens is you get anxious. And the reason you get anxious is because, well, you were beetling along quite nicely in your world, and everything was reduced to like a unidimensional simplicity. You weren't in a car as an object, you were in a thing that took you to where you wanted to go, and it was just doing what it was supposed to be doing, tracking you along the pathway to your goal. And then it fails and you're off on the side of the road, and you get anxious because how the hell are you going to get to work? And what if you don't get to work? And is your boss not going to be very happy with you? And maybe this is the third mistake you've made this week. And what if you get fired? And weren't you an idiot for buying this car? Maybe you shouldn't have a car at all. Maybe you should have walked to work. And maybe you should take a bicycle, because after all, that would save the planet. And and maybe now you have to take your car to a mechanic, but the last time you went to the mechanic you got ripped off because you're too stupid about vehicles to manage one, and you're kind of stupid about technology in general. And aren't you stupid? And maybe you're too stupid, and isn't your wife going to... That's anxiety, right? And that's the emergence of a multiplicity of pathways, right? And so what anxiety signifies is the degeneration of an attentional hierarchy into multiplicity. And the reason you get anxious and it feels bad is because now your body can't compute how much energy you have to put out in order to get to your goal. And so you can't organize the world. You're apt to use more resources than you'll replenish. And if you continue to do that, then you'll die. And so anxiety is a signal that complexity has reemerged, chaos. That's the eternal dragon of chaos. Chaos has reemerged because your narrative has collapsed. And so that's negative emotion. That's what negative emotion signifies, is that it's the collapse of an organizing narrative. And so that's very interesting to know. So you feel positive. If I walk on the stage and I know I'm supposed to go to the front of the stage, say, and the reason I want to do that is because I know I have to talk to you, and and I want to talk to you because I think it's valuable to talk to you, etc. That's nested in a hierarchy of value. And if I see a clear pathway to the front of the stage, then that actually produces positive emotion. And that positive emotion impels me forward, because positive emotion does impel you forward. That's what it's for. That's how positive emotion is linked to action. So if you're enthusiastic because you can see a pathway forward to a valued goal, and that enthusiasm manifests itself. This is true even neurochemically. It manifests itself as positive motivation to move forward. And not only that, if you're moving forward and it's working, your brain tracks the fact that it's working, and then that's linked to dopamine release, by the way, which is what cocaine releases. It's linked to dopamine release. And the other thing your brain is doing, even when you're just walking to where you want to go, if you're successfully walking there, your brain tracks what you're doing. There's circuits that are activated while you're doing it. And if what you're doing results in the result you desired, then the dopamine floods those little neurons that are active, and it makes them grow and flourish. And so as you practice something that's working, the circuit that is activated as you're practicing is bathed in dopamine, and that makes it stronger. And that feels good. It's growth. It's part of positive emotion. And so the positive emotion moves you forward, but also encourages you to develop a habit of that practice. And so one of the things I would bloody well say is, don't make a habit of pursuing things that aren't good for you. Because you build that into you. That's what happens if you become addicted to something, you know. You build a little monster inside you that's grown, it's there, it's after one goal, despite everything else. Not a good outcome. So, now positive emotion also signals the fact that it's also an energy conservation observation. So, as I move forward towards my goal, with each step I take, it's going to take less energy to get to the goal. And so that means that the positive emotion signifies, what would you say? It signifies the increasing efficiency of your action as you move towards a goal. So negative emotion signifies the fact that things have got too complex for you to manage, and positive emotion signifies that you're approaching your goal and becoming, and that there's less demand on energy output with every step forward. And so that's emotion. And that's pretty much worth knowing. And then what happens when you're watching a movie is you infer the goal of the protagonist, or the villain for that matter. You infer the goal of the character that's being portrayed on the screen. You adopt that goal as your own. Then you play out the emotions in your own body, which mimics the structure what would you call the character that's being portrayed on the screen, and you live that all out inside you. And that's also how you understand other people, right? You don't listen to someone and then figure out what they're saying and then infer what they're thinking. That isn't how it works. What you do is you listen to someone till you figure out what they're up to. As soon as you figure out what they're up to, you can adopt that frame of reference. As soon as you adopt that frame of reference, you have the same emotions. And that's what makes you united. And so that's so interesting. And so then you think, look, there's 5,000 people in here. If there were 5,000 chimpanzees, you guys would be tearing each other into shreds, because no one would be able to know what anyone else was up to. But because all of you are here paying attention to the same thing in the same way, you have virtually identical emotional states, and that means instantly your behavior is rendered predictable to one another. And there's no difference between that and peace. They're the same thing. And so what that means is that one of the predicates of a civil, productive, and peaceful society is that everyone inhabits the same narrative. And you might say, well, we don't need the same narrative. It's like, yes, we do, because if we inhabit a different narrative, then we're running emotionally in different directions, and we will not understand each other, and we will run into conflict, and that conflict can become deadly at the drop of a hat. And so it's a precondition for a civil society that everyone is united in the same narrative. And then that begs the question, right? What is the narrative insofar as we're unified? And another question, which is, what should the narrative be? Right? Now, the postmodernists figured out that we looked at the world through a story, but they said their mantra is they became skeptical of meta-narratives, which are uniting narratives. And that's all well and good to be skeptical about meta-narratives, but you run into the problem of internal disunion. Because if you don't have a uniting narrative, then you're divided against yourself, and you run into the problem of social disunity, because if we're not looking at the same thing for the same reason, then we can't get along. And those are big problems. Now, the way the postmodernists glided over that immense cataclysmic problem was to offer the proposition that the narrative that unites us is just one of power and oppression, right? And that the fundamental motivation that guides, first of all, even your internal organization, your own internal tyranny, you know, you're oppressing your id or your natural self. And then if you establish a relationship with someone like a marriage, well, that's just a manifestation of patriarchal oppression. And if you organize a business relationship, it's a relationship of mutual exploitation, and so far and so on, all the way up the political hierarchy, all the way back into the past. A more dismal view of human existence couldn't possibly be formulated. And I always think about it as a kind of implicit confession. It's like, so you think the world's all run by power, do you? Okay. I know what game you're playing and attempting to justify. And it's completely bloody preposterous because, first of all, if you tyrannize yourself, you're going to be one miserable creature. Plus, you're going to rebel constantly, as you already know. I'm sure all of you have tried at one time or another in your life to force yourself to do something with a whip, so to speak. And what you instantly find is that you're so condemned to be free that you'll even resist your own tyranny, right? Try telling yourself to do something and see if you do it. I'm going to go to the gym. That's New Year's. I'm going to the gym 3 times a week, 2 hours a day. It's like, no, you're not. You're going to last like 3 days. And then you're going to find an excuse. The rebellious part of you is going to find an excuse, then you're not going to do it. And it's a bloody mystery, isn't it? Because you'd think you could tell yourself what to do. Because otherwise, who are you, you know? You're the part that told yourself what to do, but you don't listen, so what the hell's that part? That's you, that's for sure. So you can't even tyrannize yourself with any efficiency. And then if you're married, men, you're married, try tyrannizing your wife and see how well that works. And like, it might work for 10 minutes, but she's not as big as you, but she's a lot sneakier. And you have to wake up with her tomorrow morning. And so even if you do win the fight, which you won't, she's going to bloody well take it out on you the next day, and no wonder. And so you're bound in that relationship by the necessity of continual iterative interactions, right? And they have to be moderately peaceful, or you're going to tear each other into shreds. And if it's constant conflict, you're both going to just exhaust yourself and die. So how the hell is that going to work? So it has to be at least mutually reinforcing. And maybe if you really got it together well, you could interact with each other in a way that improved your interactions across time. And maybe you're wise enough so that if you were on that track, the way you would experience that in the moment would be as exactly the kind of relationship you'd want to have with someone. And that would be something like the spirit of play and romantic love. And that would be the manifestation of an instinct that orients you across time properly in a relationship in the moment. And that's such a wonderful thing to know, right? That instinct for play and romantic love might be the voice of the wisest instinct you have, the deepest orientation to meaning that you have. You know, because there's nothing more delightful in a marriage or in a family, if you have children, than to be able to engage in something like voluntary play. And you know, if you could have the world set up the way you would want it to, if you had any sense, wouldn't it be something if mostly what you did was something akin to play? And that's equivalent. Christ in the gospel says, know that unless you become like a little child, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. And what does that mean? It means to rediscover that intense immersion in life and that capacity for play that characterized us all as children that we can't maintain because we have to mature, but that we could rediscover as adults if we were sufficiently wise and careful. And so, and then, you know, if you have friends, it's like, well, you tyrannize your friends? Well, then you don't have friends. You're just a bully with henchmen. And as soon as you stumble, they're going to stab you in the back because you surrounded yourself with craven psychopaths. They're just going to wait for the moment to take you out. That's not a friendship, obviously. And if you're running a business, and those of you who've run businesses who have a clue know this is true, it's like, what happens if you rip off your customers? Well, you can get away with it once or twice, but word gets around in no time flat, and then you're just done and bitter and resentful because your idiot machinations didn't work. But if you engage in fair trade and you're reliable and you deliver what you promised and you're half decently good to your employees and the people that you work for, then they're going to be pleased with you, and they're going to come back and they're going to talk to their friends about how well you did, and you're going to flourish. And none of that's arbitrary. You know, that's all guided by the manifestation of a certain form of attentional priority, right? You go to your customer's house, maybe you're a plumber, and the first thing you do is you listen to their damn problem. And so at least you have enough sense to engage in dialogos, right? You actually want to hear what the problem is, and then you actually want to solve it. And if you do that with some diligence, they're going to be pleased with you because they don't want sewage all over the rug. And so your interests are aligned, and if you offer what you promise, then you're going to evoke positive emotion in them and quell their anxiety, and that's exactly the service that you're offering. And so that means you're acting out the proper story, you're productive and generous and honest, and there's nothing arbitrary about that as a ethos that unites you internally and that also makes it possible for you to exist in a peaceful and productive society.
You cite a tired brain, foggy thinking, as the reason to stop answering questions or giving a talk. How do you combat this while working or writing daily? Well, I eat a big breakfast relatively soon on waking. That really helps. If any of you out there are anxious, and many of you no doubt are, there'll be a large number of you who are anxious and don't eat breakfast. There'll be a whole bunch of you out there who think, well, I don't eat breakfast. It isn't necessary. It's like, that's wrong. It's necessary. You fasted all night. If you load yourself cognitively or physiologically in the morning, your brain, stressed, will encourage your body to produce insulin. It will take all the blood sugar out of your blood, and then you're done for the day. And then you'll be anxious. And a lot of the rest of you too, you'll find if you're anxious, try this. It's really, really interesting experiment. The next time you're anxious, go eat something. Eat some protein and fat would be best. You could have cheese and crackers. I'm not a big fan of carbohydrates, but whatever. Eat whatever you're willing to eat, but make it solid. Don't eat a peanut butter, or don't eat a chocolate bar or something sweet. Eat something substantial, a piece of meat, a piece of cheese, some peanut butter, something like that. And then wait 10 minutes and see if you're less anxious. And try that for like 2 weeks. Every time you get anxious, eat something. Because then you can find out if your anxiety is linked to low blood sugar. And it's very likely that it is, especially if you also get irritable and foggy in your thinking. And the best way to treat that, as far as I've been able to tell, and there's a decent literature on this, is to make sure that you eat a big breakfast. And you might say, well, I'm not hungry in the morning. It's like, who the hell cares if you're hungry? I didn't say enjoy your breakfast. I said eat it. That's not the same thing. You know, there's lots of things that you need to do that you don't enjoy to begin with. You'll get hungry in 6 months and then you'll start to enjoy it. So that's a massive difference. I take small naps quite frequently. If I'm wiped out, you know, I'll go have a nap for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And then that helps quite a lot. I try to wake up on a fairly regular schedule. That's another thing I would really recommend for people whose lives are in disarray and who are anxious. Try to fix your wake time. Going when you sleep, that's not so important. So you can still, you know, stay up late and have fun and all that. But getting up in the morning is really helpful. So, you know, and you also have to figure out how much you can work or write. I can't write for more than about max. My sustainable maximum for writing is 3 hours a day. And if I push it past that, then, especially if I'm editing, I make mistakes when I'm editing, so that's counterproductive, and I can't sustain it across time. And so I don't really think you can do more than about 3 hours of extremely intense intellectual work a day. Although if you have a nap, you can stretch that, but I think at least I end up paying for it across time. So nap, make sure you eat, and make sure that you get enough sleep. So that's how I combat it and try to make myself hyper efficient.
Imagine someone that you treat well, that you love. Then try to treat yourself that way. You got to detach from yourself a bit. You got to think, okay, well, I'm a person among other people, and I deserve at least as much respect as a person among other people, and I should be trying to help myself across time. And instead of being self-contemptuous and self-destructive, I need to take care of myself as if I'm potentially valuable, and to lay out my life that way. And so that's what that chapter is about. And it's hard for people, you know, they don't take care of themselves as well as they should. And I don't mean, you know, take care of yourself. I mean, that isn't what I mean. It's like, it's not a moralistic attack. It's like, it's an encouragement to give yourself a bit of the benefit of the doubt. Take care of your room, take care of your things, like have some respect for yourself. It's like there is a lot of potential within you, and there's many things that you can do, and you're necessary more than you think to the unfolding of things. Like if you make a bunch of bad decisions, things get worse, not just for you, like things get worse. And so it matters what you do. And so part of what you do is you want to treat yourself as if what you do matters. And so you want to have some respect for yourself. exactly is personality, or what exactly is a trait. Think of a trait as an element of personality. And I think the best way to think about a trait is as a sub-personality. So you're made up of sub-personalities that are integrated into something vaguely resembling a unity, but the unity is diverse. Part of the reason it's useful to know what your traits are is because it can help you figure out how you should orient your life. Like, so for example, if you're high in extroversion, you know, you've got a proclivity towards sales, for example, and you're going to like occupations where you have a lot of opportunity for social interactions and social networking. You're not going to be happy if your job requires you to sit alone for extended periods of time and work in the absence of social interaction. So, and you want to be in a position that capitalizes on your traits, because it's really difficult to work contrary to your traits. Imagine that you're looking for a stable partner, right? So you might think, well, what do you want in a stable partner? And at least in principle, one of the things you don't want is too much mismatch between you and that person. So for example, if you're really extroverted and you have a really introverted partner, you're going to engage in continual conflict about how much social activity the two of you should subject yourself to. And it's very, very difficult for people who widely differ on those dimensions to come to consensus, because it's not just a matter of opinion, right? It's really a matter of different, if you're looking at extremes, of really different types of people. And the thing about introverts is they just don't enjoy large-scale social interaction that much. One-on-one, they're often fine, but in a group, they don't like that, and it tires them out. Whereas a real extrovert, it's like you isolate them, and they just wither on the vine, because a huge part of what actually motivates them in a positive way is tangled up with social interaction. And so, if you're an agreeable person and you have a particularly disagreeable partner, you're also going to run into problems, because the agreeable person will say whatever you want, whenever, and a disagreeable person will say, well, I'd like to know what the hell you want for a change, and be much more harsh and much more demanding in the situation. And the agreeable person is going to find the disagreeable person harsh and unpleasant, and the disagreeable person is going to find the agreeable person wishy-washy and unable to stand up for themselves. And again, that's actually one of the primary sources of tension between men and women, because women tend to be higher in agreeableness than men. To determine when you were being inauthentic or non-congruent. And I've thought about this for a long time and tried to sort it out in a practical manner, and what I've concluded is this. You can try this for a couple of weeks. It's an extremely interesting exercise. So you sort of have to detach yourself from your thoughts and what you say. So you start by assuming that what you say and what you think is not necessarily you. And of course that's just the case, because a lot of what you think, in fact most of what you think and most of what you say, are the opinions of other people. They're things you've read or things people have told you. You know, that's a benefit in some ways, because you get all those thoughts that other people have spent a long time formulating, but it's a disadvantage in that it's not exactly you. Okay, so you detach yourself from that. You're no longer your thoughts or the things that you say, or maybe you're no longer all of them. And now what you're going to try to find out is which of your thoughts and things that you say are you, and maybe so you can not utilize the rest, or maybe so that you can correct the rest, because they're not representative of yourself as an integrated being. They don't take everything into account. There's this idea that philosophers have developed in the last 50 years called performative contradiction. It's like a lie. Normally you think of a lie as you lie when you say something that you know not to be true. And there's different forms of lies. There's sins of commission, lies of commission, where you literally say something and you know it not to be true. And then there are lies of omission, where you have something to say and you don't. And classically, people have regarded sins of commission more seriously than sins of omission. But sins of omission, they're not nothing. And you know, I've read studies that purport to demonstrate that if you ask people when they're older, you know, what they regret most in their life, it isn't the mistakes they've made. It's the opportunities that presented themselves to them that they never took. Right? That's a sin of omission. I think it's an open question. You know, maybe your life would be long enough, even though it's short. Maybe your life would be long enough if you took advantage of everything that came your way. Maybe you exhaust yourself in the pursuit of that opportunity so that you could be content with the finitude of your mortal existence. If you didn't avoid and hide things in the fog, let's say, that's rule number 3. Do not hide unwanted things in the fog. Your own future, all that opportunity. Do not do what you hate. You go to work and you hate it, right? You're forced to do things that you don't want to do, that grate against, not your lack of discipline, right? We have to get that straight, not your immaturity. You have to, if you're resentful, you got to ask yourself, are you just immature or are you being tyrannized? No, those are the questions. And the probability that you're immature is very high if you're resentful, but it's also, well, it's the case for everyone, right? It's like, have you fully grown up? It's highly improbable. And well, you know people, you know what they're like, you know yourself, that you're still 13 in some ways. And I can see this in my clinical clients often. It was so interesting watching them talk, because especially if they had been hurt at some point in their life, they would literally, I could see them transform right before my eyes. I saw one woman once who talked to me about a very traumatic experience she had. Her mother put her in a grocery cart, and it was on a hill, and she rolled down the hill in the bloody grocery cart, and it spilled her out, and she ended up in the hospital and under the care of a pretty damn psychopathic nurse. And it really tilted her towards paranoia for the rest of her life, right? She was so shocked, first of all, that she got hurt, and second of all, that when she went for help, she encountered someone malevolent who actually, what would you say, fed on her pain. She never recovered from that. And then when she was telling me the story, she was like a 55-year-old woman. She was 5. Like everything about her just shifted, like her tone of voice, the set of her face, the voice she used. You could just see that part of her had come to one crash and halt in the out-of-control shopping cart that hit the pavement hard when she was 5 years old. And this hate. There's this idea in the New Testament. It's a very tricky idea. There's one unforgivable sin. People have argued forever about what that is. Because the idea that one of the ideas our culture is based on is that if you've made mistakes in your life, but you admit to them, so that's to confess, let's say, and then you repent, which is to figure out what the hell you did wrong and decide to do better in the future. And that can be very hard if you did something really wrong, so it's not like it's an easy thing to do. It's difficult in proportion to the magnitude of your failure to aim, let's say. But that if you do that properly, no matter how far you've strayed, that you can be set back on the proper path, right? That you can be forgiven and that you can then move ahead. And we better hope that's true, because there isn't anybody anywhere who hasn't done many things that were pretty damn dark. And if it was all only the case that we were done when we made a mistake, then, the jig's up for everyone. And so you need justice, because you can't get away with everything or even anything, perhaps, but you need mercy too. And mercy is, well, the same. You apply that to your children as well. They make a mistake or multiple mistakes, and perhaps even more so when they're teenagers. And the basic rule is still, try to do better and you're still welcome, fundamentally. And that's a good rule. That's a really good rule. What would interfere with that process of redemption, let's say, and maybe that's your decision not to abide by the dictates of your own conscience. So you tell yourself, I shouldn't be doing this, whatever it happens to be. Maybe you don't find your job meaningful, and not that that's a simple problem. Or maybe you're really called upon to do things at work or in your family life, or just to save your good name, that really do disturb you, and yet you do them anyway. And then you practice doing that. You make that into a habit, and everything you practice, that becomes you. This is true neurologically. If you repeat something over and over, if you practice it, you build the biological structures that make you an expert at that. And so if you're practicing violating your own conscience with a performative contradiction, this other form of lie, this willingness to act out things that run contrary to your own sense of morality, right? So you act out a lie, well, then you become the embodiment of a lie. And, well, there's endless metaphorical speculation about the spirit of the lie, right? I mean, that's one of the characterizations of the great adversary of mankind, is the prince of lies. And you allow that to take up its residence within you because you're rationalizing doing what you hate, then you do that at your own peril. And if you get really good at that, maybe there's no way back. The danger of being an actor, is that you become the actor and then you lose you, obviously. You replace you with that falsehood, and that will make you bitter, to lose you in the service of a falsehood. And then, once you're bitter, then you're vengeful, and once you're vengeful, then you're, what's next? Fratricidal. That's Cain, by the way. And once you're fratricidal, the next step is homicidal, and the step past that is genocidal. And, you can walk down all those steps, and people have lots of times. And every one of us has something in us of all of that. That's for sure. And you don't want to practice that.
You say you are morally obligated to do remarkable things. Mm-hmm. Why?
Well, I think partly because life is so difficult and challenging that unless you give it everything you have, the chances are very high that it will embitter you, and then you'll be a force for darkness and not good. And so, the fact that life is short and can be brutal can terrify you into hiding and avoiding. You can flip that on its head and understand that since you're all in anyways, you might as well take the risks that are adventurous. There isn't anything more adventurous than the truth. So why is that a moral obligation? Well, if you hide and you don't let what's inside of you out, and you don't bring into the world what you could bring, and you become cynical and bitter, you will start doing very dark things. Not only will you not add to the world what you could add, but you'll start being jealous of people who are competent and doing well and work to destroy them. So that's the pathway to hell, really. We need to separate out the distinction between fantasy and delusion. You do have a fantasy about the future. So you have to provisionally map the future. That's what a plan is. That doesn't make it a delusion. Like, it becomes a delusion when the map bears no relationship to the underlying territory. So if you have a strategy for the future, maybe let's say that your strategy for the future is that you have 5 million YouTube subscribers in 3 years. Well, you have no evidence of the strict sort that that's how it's going to be, because anything could happen between now and 3 years from now, let's say. But there's no reason to call that a delusion. It's one hypothetically possible path of potential, and then you can make the sacrifices necessary to bring that about. So even though it's a fantasy because it maps something that isn't there, it's not a delusion. It's a delusion when you're ignoring elements of your own experience that would inform your fantasy more effectively. You're ignoring them so that you can live in a positive representation of the future without having to pay the appropriate price for it. The ultimate ideal is also the ultimate judge, because the ultimate ideal is something against which you fall far short. And that might be so painful that you can barely stand it. But then what you do is two things, I suppose, is you lower the ideal and you raise your estimation of your potential. And what do I mean by lower the ideal? Well, if you're comparing yourself to someone or even to a future self, and the gap is so painful that it paralyzes you, then you've created a dragon that you don't have the tools to master. And so what you have to do is you have to scale the dragon down to size. And you want to scale the dragon down to size until it's a size that you are willing to move toward, however small that is. Now, you know, if you're here and your ideal is here and that gap is unbearable, then you reduce the gap and you reduce the gap. And you're going to have to do that anyways, because you're not going to move from where you are to perfect in one fell swoop, right? There's going to be incremental steps. So you have to fill in that hierarchy of progression with a high enough resolution representation so that you can start to move forward. There's another gospel comment that's very interesting. It's called the Matthew principle. And the Matthew principle is, to those who have everything, more will be given, and from those who have nothing, everything will be taken. Now, it's brutal because it implies that reality works like this. When you're moving up, you go like this, right? And that's pretty nice. That's a lot better than this. But when you're going down, you go like that, right? It's like downhill, downhill, cliff. Okay, so you want to avoid the downhill path. Well, if the uphill path is like this, which is like exponential, let's say, or geometric, then what that means is that it doesn't matter how big the first steps you take uphill are, even if they're trivial, even if they're shameful in their size, because you're so useless. If you're disciplined in that, you'll speed up extraordinarily rapidly. And so that's the good news, you might say, is that you can take very small steps, even ones that might be shameful in their size, and you have to admit that to yourself. But once you get the ball rolling, it doesn't roll in a linear fashion, it rolls in a geometric fashion. And this is a really good thing to know, because it can take the sting out of the realization of your own stupidity. It's like, yeah, you know, everybody has their weak sides, let's say, things they're embarrassed about. When I first started going to the gym, I was like 23, and I think I weighed 135 pounds, and I was 6'1", very, very thin, 27-inch waist, something like that. And I smoked like mad, and I drank too much. Like, I wasn't in good shape. The first attempts forward I took in the gym, I went to this swimsuit class. Jesus, it was me and this like really fat guy, young guy, probably not in any worse shape than me, and like 7 old women over 70, and they could outswim me. Like, it was pretty damn humiliating. And so I did a semester of that and got myself in somewhat better shape. And then I started to go to the gym to work out, to lift weights. And that was also rough because, you know, I'd be underneath the bloody bench press trying to lift 75 pounds off the rests. And, you know, some muscle-headed bastard would come over and tell me how to do it. And it's like, yeah, thank you. But you know, it's embarrassing, and lots of times people won't do things like go to the gym because they're so embarrassed about how they look or what sort of shape they're in. And it's a pain to start at the bottom, but you start at the bottom where you're weak. And if you want to rectify what's weak, you have to accept the fact that you're at the bottom and that the first steps are going to be painful. You know, it took me about 3 years, but I stopped smoking, and then I stopped drinking, and I gained 40 pounds of muscle in like 3.5 years, something like that. I basically had to stop doing that because I had to eat like 6 times a day. It was crazy. But I got a lot more physically confident and a lot more coordinated. But the point of all this is, if you're going to rectify your weaknesses, you have to admit your insufficiency to your own shame. Now, if the gap between you and your ideal is so great that it paralyzes you, you shrink that. Things will beckon to you and call to you, and you'll have intuitions about which pathway to take. And you will, in all likelihood, follow those, because what else do you have? You have these orienting instincts. This is another reason why you don't lie. Because if you lie and you practice lying, you pathologize your instincts. And then your intuitions lead you wrong. You don't want to lie because you program yourself falsely, and then you automatically see what isn't there. And then, of course, the world will slap you in the face continually, and you'll think, oh my God, the world's such a pathological place. When the truth of the matter is that, no, you just keep running into things that you refuse to see. And then you think, well, the world's made of nothing but obstacles. It's like, well, you put the obstacles in your own path, and you did that by developing these complex, self-serving delusions, a story that you tell other people about who you are that isn't true. You're trying to lay out a map that bears no relationship to reality, and you keep wondering why you wander off the path and into a pit. It's like, well, how could it be otherwise? People have commented to me many times about my bravery, and I don't like that. It's not right. I'm afraid of different things than the typical person. Maybe that's a good way of thinking about it. I'm way more afraid of the consequences of saying something that's false or wandering off the appropriate path than I am of whatever consequences might come for saying what I believe and doing what I believe to be the case. I'm way more afraid of that. You know, I've been reading the Gospel of St. Matthew. I'm writing a book at the moment called We Who Wrestle with God, and one of the things Christ says to people continually is to not damage their vision, is to not put, that's the best way of putting it, don't occlude your eye. You can see what's in front of you if you're willing to see it. And if you're willing to see it, many of the terrible obstacles in life you can just walk around. But if you blind yourself purposefully to follow your own narrow, self-serving delusion, you're going to run into terrible things and terrible people and the terrible part of your own soul all the time. That's what you should be afraid of. You can't be isolated, alone, without responsibility, and pursuing your hedonistic nonsense and not be insane and miserable. Those are all the same thing, right? And so, you know, it's got to the point, I've said things that have made me somewhat unpopular, like it's very difficult for people to mature until they have a child. You find a huge part of what you are in that relationship. It makes you responsible, makes you grow up. It gives you the opportunity to mentor someone. You have someone around who's more important than you. Well, that's part of being mentally healthy. It's a huge part of it. This enterprise that I've helped put together, Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, we're trying to put forward a model of governance. It's called a subsidiary model, and the idea is that people have multiple social roles that scale. No, there's you should take care of yourself, integrate yourself, which means you can conduct yourself properly across the medium to long run. You're self-sustaining. Then you can maybe extend that to your partner, and then to your family, and then to your local community, and then to broader communities as you become more and more competent and able to take on that responsibility. That's the alternative to isolated hedonic slavery. You're slave to your own whims, and it's the alternative to tyranny, because if you take on all that responsibility, you don't have any need for someone to govern you. It's truly the case that your sanity is the concordance between you as an individual and the world. That's the sanity. You're distributed out into the world, and you should be, and that's, you want to be. That's where the adventure is. You want to be solipsistic? The solipsistic porn masturbator. Jesus, it's no wonder to be aimless and miserable. Well, God, it's so pathetic. Why am I so unhappy? It's because you think about yourself. Oh, no, you think about the lowest impulses in yourself all the time. That's why you're miserable. People exist in a sacrificial relationship to the world. What does that mean? It seems to mean something like human beings are aware of their extended self. You know you're going to be around tomorrow and next week and next month and next year and 5 years from now and 10 years from now. Now it's less certain as you go out, but you do have the sense of yourself as something that stretches across the decades. Okay, and so what that means is that you have to conduct yourself in a manner that isn't merely immediate. You have to conduct yourself in a manner that will work across time. Now, how do people do that? They work. Work is a sacrificial gesture. So you work, by definition, virtually. Work is the sacrifice of the present for the future. I mean, maybe someone can come up with a better definition of work than that, but I don't think so. It's like you put in time and effort right now, even if it's something not what you'd like to be doing at the moment. You put in time and effort because you believe. What the hell does that mean? You believe it'll pay off. Well, is that a contract with the future? Is it a covenant? Because the relationship that the biblical corpus characterizes human striving is covenantal. It's a bargain. The bargain is you make the right sacrifices and they pay off. That's the bargain. Now you might say, well, that's just part of the social contract, but the biblical corpus insists that it's deeper than that. It's built into the structure of reality itself. And that if you got the sacrifices right, the future would be paradisal. That's a kind of sacrifice right there, is that you're willing to sacrifice your short-term physiological and psychological comfort for a medium to long-term benefit. It's the essence of sacrifice. This is something the atheists don't understand about the biblical narrative, is that the narrative insists that we live in a sacrificial relationship. It's the essence of humanity to live in a sacrificial relationship. It's like, well, is that true or not? Well, as you mature, your relationships are more sacrificial. It's less about what you, in your narrow sense, want right now, and it's more about what's good over the medium to long run, including other people. Well, that's a sacrificial relationship. Now, the covenant, and this is a matter of faith. It's the matter of the deepest faith. Are you willing to act out the proposition that the way to make the world reveal it will suffice? There's technically two different forms of reward. There's consummatory reward. That's what an orgasm is. It's consummatory reward. It brings the behavioral and perceptual sequence to a halt. It ends it, right? At the climax, it ends it. But then it's over. That journey is over, right? Then there's the dopaminergic reward, and dopaminergic reward is evidence of advancement towards a goal, right? Okay, so there's a corollary to that. Well, how do you become optimally engaged? Because dopamine facilitates engagement and focus, which is why drugs like amphetamines can be used for kids who are attention deficit disorder. You tap up the dopamine response, they lock on, right? Okay, so they're locking on to a goal-directed pursuit. The problem with amphetamines is that they can lock you on so hard you can't get out of the frame. So like kids on amphetamines will obsess, for example, about cleaning up their closet. They can't switch to the next activity. Okay, dopaminergic reward is reward that's accrued in relationship to a goal. Okay, so what's an implication of that? Well, pursue the highest possible goal. Well, why? Because the kick from advancement is higher. Now, you have to balance that. It can't be, you have to advance, right? Because imagine the reward's got two components. Number one is you're moving towards something valuable. Okay, so you want it to be as valuable as possible. Okay, but you have to be moving. You need something extremely valuable that you can move towards. Okay, so part of the reason that you establish a relationship with God, let's say, is because that's what sets the upper bound to your vision. It's like, I want things to be the best they could be. That's a vision of paradise. Well, that has to be fractionated into, your proximal decisions, but lurking behind that should be this continual movement towards, what would you say, a heaven that recedes as you approach it. That's the proper vision of heaven. A heaven is a place that's perfect and getting better, both at the same time. That's what music shows you, because a great piece of music is perfect, but it's just getting better as it unfolds. And you need that. This is part of the problem with a static utopian vision, something Dostoevsky criticized. If you gave people nothing but consummatory reward, he famously says, so that they can do nothing but sit in tubs of hot water, eat cake, and busy themselves with the continuation of the species, human beings would break that all to hell in a moment just so they have something interesting to do. If you run yourself through a disciplinary process, so you accomplish something, maybe you don't attain the goal you were aiming at, but you accrue a new way of looking at the world and a set of skills. Well, if you just keep doing that, you have multiple ways of looking at the world and more skill. Well, that's your storehouse of treasure. As you walk through life in your normal mode, things will call to you. And if you pursue them, they will take you deep. It doesn't really matter what it is that call. What matters is that you pursue it, and you pursue it to the depths. And as you pursue it to the depths, you will become transformed. And if you do that without reservation, that will turn you into the person who frees the slaves and opposes the tyrants. And that is how it works. That's the call. And that can happen in any direction, virtually any direction. You just have to pursue it with sufficient faith. In the future authoring program, which is the one we've done the most research on, so if people do this for 90 minutes badly before they go to college,
it'll decrease the probability they'll drop out in the first year by 50%.
That's amazing.
And it works particularly well for people who are most likely to drop out. So a lot of psychological interventions help the good performers do even better and don't help the bad performers that much.
And why do you think it helps them more?
Well, I think the good performers already have a bit of a vision and a plan, whereas the bad performers, they're really ambivalent about what they're doing because they don't have a plan. And we'll talk more about why this is so important. So if you don't have a reason to do something, and then a reason not to do it comes up, well, then you just not do it, because not doing things is real easy. You can just sit there and not do things all day. Doing things takes effort, and so any resistance is likely to, it pushes back against you. And so going to college, it's like, well, why is that difficult? Well, you have to get up, you have to go to your classes, you have to do the assignments, you have to do the reading, you have to write the tests, you have to believe that this path is somehow better than any other path you could be on, and there's innumerable other paths, and that it's better in some fundamental sense than just doing nothing or playing games or being purely hedonic. So there's a lot of, because it's difficult, there's a lot of obstacles. And if you don't have a reason, well, why would you overcome the obstacles? And so what happens when you do the future authoring program is two things. Is first of all, you construe yourself as the sort of person who could have a reason, right? Who could make a vision and impose it on the world.
And how do you do that?
Well, and then second, you actually develop a vision. Okay, so the first thing the program asks you to do, and it's got a biblical element to it in some fundamental sense, although that wasn't so explicit when we first developed it, but I came to realize that later. There's a statement in the Gospels. Christ says to his followers, ask and you'll receive. Knock and the door will open. Seek and you'll find. And you listen to that and you think, no way, man, it can't be that easy. Well, it's that easy. Because let's think about what wanting means. You want something. You want to find, so you'll seek. How hard are you going to seek? You know, maybe you're after the Holy Grail, right? Or you're after the gold in the dragon's lair, or the jewel in the toad's head. You're after something that's guarded by some monstrous figure. You're going to seek? How committed to that are you? And there's a total commitment in that in a fundamental way. It's like you should be humble enough to be open to learning, to radical transformation, to the probability that you're really wrong if you're not finding what you're seeking, and the willingness to sacrifice virtually everything of lesser value for that goal. Otherwise, you do not want it. You did not ask. You are not seeking. You did not knock on the door. Well, this is the development of a vision. Now, you can construe consciousness as the implementer of the vision in the broadest sense. So what we really confront as human beings isn't a deterministic world that runs like clockwork, that the past pushes forward in an algorithmic or deterministic manner. That isn't how the world works. The way the world works is that we confront a horizon of possibility that's not predictable. It's somewhat predictable the way a musical piece is predictable. So it's rule governed, but it's not predictable in a deterministic way. And it's full of possibility and potential. That's actually its nature. It's potential in its nature. And to maximize the quality of our interaction with that potential, we have to impose a vision on it and then pursue the vision. And so when you do the future authoring program, well, that's what you're trying to do, is develop a vision. So here's the first exercise. It's like, okay, here's the deal, all right? You get to have what you need and what you want. Maybe even better, you get to have what you need and want if you were treating yourself properly. So imagine, first of all, that you were treating yourself properly because you actually cared for yourself.
Okay, and say you don't.
Yeah, well, you don't.
How do you help somebody?
Well, you at least ask them to open the door to the possibility that maybe they could. So just imagine that you did. Not that you are, that you could, but that you tried. Think, okay, I'm a valuable person, maybe, and if I was treating myself like I had intrinsic value, like if you were treating yourself like you were someone you loved, so you could imagine
doing this for someone you actually cared about? Because most people care about someone that isn't them.
So do you identify someone you care about?
Well, you can, yes, you can say, because it does tell you. It's like, well, if you're not so good at caring for yourself, imagine someone you love and then pretend that you're bringing that attitude to bear on you with all your faults and inadequacies. I'm not being casual about this. It's hard for people to do this, right? Because we know our own flaws so deeply. It's hard for us to take care of ourselves. But imagine that you should take care of yourself and that you could and that you did. Just imagine that. So that's opening up at least the door, right?
Yeah.
And then you say, well, 5 years down the road, you get to have what you want and need. What is it? And so this is a deep question. So, because the question is this: your life is going to be difficult, and it's going to be marked by suffering and tragedy in all sorts of different ways. Disappointment and obstacle and betrayal and the whole panoply of human catastrophe. That's absolutely 100% definitely coming your way. Okay, so given that, and given that you want to live a life free of resentment and bitterness and premature aging and excess suffering, and that you don't want to be a burden to everyone around you, what would you have to make carrying that weight worthwhile? That's a hard question, you know. It's like, what justifies your suffering? That isn't how am I going to be happy. It's what justifies your suffering. Well, ask yourself. You get to have what you want. If you're taking care of yourself, what would it be? Okay, and so you write for 15 minutes about what your life might be like 5 years down the road if you got to have what you needed and wanted. And then we concretize it. You know, I had lots of clients and students who said, well, I don't know what to do with my life. What should I do with my life? And the first answer to that question is, that's not a very good question. Because it's like, what, do you want a one-line answer to what you should do with your life? Like, life is everything, and you want a one-line answer to everything. No. Bad question. You can imagine a desirable future, but it helps to particularize it. So one of the things you might ask is, where do people find meaning? And the answer is, well, in multiple places. Here's some places people typically find meaning. So if clients came to me and they were depressed, first of all, I'd try to find out, are you depressed? Or do you just have a terrible life, or some combination of those two? And you might ask, what's the difference? And that's a really good question. If you're depressed, you have a good life, but you're suffering. So what would it mean that you have a good life? Well, it means somewhat different things to different people, but you can kind of triangulate on it. Probably you have an intimate relationship, or at least you have the prospects of one. So at least you want one, and you believe that maybe you could have one if you don't have one, and probably if you have a good life, you have one. You have some friends. They're real friends, right? You have some family members, children, perhaps, if not children, parents and siblings, or perhaps both, grandchildren. You're nested inside a family, and your relationships with your family are desirable. You have a job or a career, and so if it's a job, well, then it's hard, and maybe you wouldn't have picked it as a vocation, but at least maybe you have good relationships with your coworkers, and you're doing something difficult, but that's actually socially productive and useful and generates an income. So that's not nothing. You're educated to the level of your intellectual capability, or you have plans to do so. You're taking care of yourself mentally and physically, and you have a strategy for dealing with the realm of signal temptation, drug and alcohol abuse and sexual misbehavior and that sort of thing. And then we've added one more recently, at least conceptually, that you've adopted a certain degree of civic responsibility, right? You're participating in the broader community in some manner. And if you're doing none of those, my life is meaningless. Are you doing any of these? No. Well, that's why it's meaningless. Those are the domains of meaning. And so, if you're miserable and you have none of those things, the first thing to do, if you're a cognitive behavioral therapist with someone, is to say, well, how about we work on like one of these things to begin with? You know, you need some friends. You need to get out in the dating market. You need a job or a better job. You need an educational plan. Like, you don't have a life, so of course you're miserable, because without sustaining meaning, life is just tragedy. And so your lot is misery.
And so anyways, we ask people to go through these 8 different domains and say, okay, you can have what you want, but you have to aim at it. Sin means to miss the mark, by the way. It means to miss the target. That's what takes you away from God, is to miss the target. What target? Yeah, right. What target? Right. You got to at least know there's a target, then you got to try to hit it. You know, and maybe you don't even know where the target is, but your aim isn't good, but at least you've set up a target now, and you can practice. And so, well, if you had an intimate relationship, what would it look like? If you had some friends, how would you like those friendships to be conducted? If you had a job or a career, what could it be if you had what you wanted? Okay, we're having a conversation. I'm deciding I'm going to listen to you, right? That's different than how people generally communicate, because usually when they communicate, they're doing something like, okay, we're going to have a conversation and I'm going to tell you why I'm right and I'll win if you agree. Or maybe you're having a conversation where, I don't know what you're trying to do. Maybe you're trying to impress the person you're talking to. So you're not listening to them at all. You're just thinking about what you're going to say next. Okay, so that's not this. This is, you might have something to tell me. And so I'm going to listen on the off chance that you'll tell me something that would really be useful for me to know. And so if you agree with me and I find that out, I know nothing more than I knew before. I just know what I knew before. And maybe I'm happy about that because, you know, it didn't get challenged. But I'm no smarter than I was before. But maybe you're different than me. And so while I'm listening to you, you'll tell me something I don't like. Maybe it's something I find contemptible or difficult, whatever. Maybe you'll tell me something I don't know, and then I won't be quite as stupid. And then maybe I won't run painfully into quite as many things. And that's a really useful thing to know, especially if you live with someone and you're trying to make long-term peace with them, is they're not the same as you. And their way they look at the world and the facts that they pull out of the world aren't the same as your facts. And even though you're going to be overwhelmed with the proclivity to demonstrate that you're right, it is the case that 2 brains are better than 1. And so maybe 9 of the 10 things they tell you are dispensable, or maybe even 49 out of 50, but one thing, all you need to get out of the damn conversation is one thing you don't know. And one of the things that's very cool about a good psychotherapeutic session is that the whole conversation is like that. All you're doing is trying to express the truth of the situation as clearly as possible. That's it. And so, now, Roger's proposition, and I'll tell you why he derived it, was that if you have a conversation like that with someone, it will make both of you better. It'll make both of you psychologically healthier. So there's an implicit presupposition that the exchange of truth is curative. Well, that's a very cool idea. I mean, it's a very deep idea. It's the idea upon which Western civilization, although not only Western civilization, is actually predicated. The idea that truth produces health. But for Rogers, that was the entire purpose of the Psychotherapeutic Alliance. You come to see me because you want to be better. You don't even know what that means necessarily, neither do I. We're going to figure that out together. But you come and you say, look, things are not acceptable to me, and maybe there's something I could do about that. So that's the minimal precondition to engage in therapy. Something's wrong, you're willing to talk about it truthfully, and you want it to be better. Without that, the therapeutic relationship does not get off the ground. And so then you might ask, well, what relationships are therapeutic? And the answer to that would be, if you have a real relationship, it's therapeutic. If it isn't, what you have is not a relationship. God only knows what you have. You're a slave, they're a tyrant, you know, you're both butting heads with one another. It's a primate dominance hierarchy dispute. Oh, I don't know, you're like 2 cats in a barrel, or 2 people with their hands around each other's throats. But what you have is not a relationship. One of the things I try to do in my therapeutic sessions is, first of all, to listen, to really listen. And then, while I listen, I watch. And while I'm listening, things will happen in my head. You know, maybe I'll get a little image of something, or I'll get a thought or a question will emerge, and then I'll just tell the person what that is. But it's sort of directionless, you know. It's not like I have a goal, except that we're trying to make things better. I'm on the side of the part of the person that wants things to be better, not worse. And so those parts of us have a dialogue, and the consequence of that dialogue is that certain things take place, and then I'll just tell the person what happened. And it isn't that I'm right. That's not the point. The point is that they get to have an hour where someone actually tells them what they think. Here's the impact you're having on me. This is making me angry. This is making me happy. This is really interesting. This reminds me of something that you said an hour ago that I don't quite understand. And the whole point is not for either person to make the proposition or convince the other that their position is correct, but merely to have an exchange of experience about how things are set up. And it's extraordinarily useful for people because it's often difficult for anyone to find anyone to talk to that will actually listen. And so another thing that's really strange about this listening is that if you listen to people, they will tell you the weirdest bloody things so fast you just cannot believe it. So if you're having a conversation with someone and it's dull, it's because you're not listening to them properly, because they're weird. They're like wombats or albatrosses or rhinoceroses or something. Like, they're strange creatures. And so if you were actually communicating with them and they were telling you how weird they really are, it would be anything but boring. And you can ask questions. That's a really good way of listening. But one of Roger's points is, well, you have to be oriented properly in order to listen. And the orientation has to be, look, what I want out of this conversation is that the place we both end up is better than the place we left. That's it. That's what I'm after. And if you're not after that, you got to think, why the hell wouldn't you be after that? What could you possibly be after that would be better than that? You walk away smarter and more well-equipped for the world than you were before you had the conversation, and so does the other person. Well, maybe if you're bitter and resentful and angry and anxious and, generally annoyed at the world, then that isn't what you want. You want the other person to walk away worse, and you too, because you're full of revenge. But, you'll get what you want if you do that. So we know from our research that such empathic understanding with a person, not about him, is such an effective approach that it can bring about major changes in personality. Some of you may be feeling that you listen well to people and that you have never seen such results. The chances are very great that you have not been listening in the manner that I've described. Fortunately, I can suggest a little experiment that you can do to test the quality of your understanding. The next time you get into an argument with your wife or your friend or a small group of friends, stop the discussion for a moment and, for an experiment, institute this rule. Each person can speak up for himself only after he has first restated the ideas and feelings of the previous speaker accurately. What accurately means is they have to agree with your restatement. Now, that's an annoying thing to do, because if someone is talking to you and you disagree with them, the first thing you want to do is take their argument, make the stupidest possible thing out of it that you can. That's the straw man, and then demolish it. It's like, so then you can walk away feeling good about it, and you've dominated them really nicely. But that isn't what you do. You say, okay, well, I'm going to take what you told me, and maybe I'm even going to make your argument stronger than the one you made. That's useful if you're dealing with someone that you have to live with, because maybe they can't bloody well express themselves very well, but they have something to say. So you make their argument strong. All right, then you see what this would mean. It would mean that before presenting your own point of view, it would be necessary for you to really achieve the other speaker's frame of reference, to understand his thoughts and feelings so well that you could summarize them for him. Sounds simple, doesn't it? But if you will try it, you'll find that it's the most difficult thing that you've ever done.
You said that a harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very dangerous man who has that under voluntary control. How should people become more dangerous?
Oh, becoming more articulate is definitely, I would say, that's the primary array of weapons. So, physical prowess is something, and it's not nothing, that physical confidence that comes along with that as well. But the same thing replicated at the level of the ability to communicate and to think, that's way broader field of battle and opportunity. So this is one thing that isn't taught well, especially to boys. It's more important to teach it to boys, I would say, because they're more skeptical of the educational enterprise in general, generally speaking, partly because they're less obedient, partly because they're less agreeable. That's particularly true for disagreeable boys. And agreeable boys get higher grades independent of their IQ and their academic achievement, because they're easier to deal with. So what do you tell disagreeable boys? There's nothing that makes you more formidable than verbal competence, than being able to articulate, be able to think, to marshal your arguments, right? It's a battlefield metaphor. Get everything in order, get all your information straight, to marshal your forces.
And so, I mean, that's part of the reason that rap artists are so popular, especially among disaffected young men, black and white alike, because they're unbelievably articulate. Like, they have this incredible verbal prowess. It's unbelievably attractive. You know, and it's associated with genuine artistic and redemptive activity, often focusing on something that's approximately the voice of the underclass, let's say, but a powerful voice, right? And it's interesting to see how many young white guys identify with that.
Was it Aldous Huxley that wrote Doors of Perception?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is kind of an equivalent of that, right? That you have a experience which many people struggle to articulate. You take the best of us, the one that has the most precise, most articulate, erudite language. You drop them in and you say, okay, show us what you've learned. This is the equivalent, but for just a different community, a different sort of life, that maybe you don't have the ability to describe what it feels like to live on a council estate in Manchester or in, you know, one of the neighborhoods of Brooklyn or whatever it might be. And then this person can, and it feels like it's your voice.
Yeah, well, you still, if you're a young man, you still feel alienated from your place as rightful heir of the proper kingdom. I mean, that's an existential truism for everyone, particularly for every young man. Because he is an outsider in many ways. He's young and juvenile and not very highly valued, and then is in some sense hurt by the inadequacies of the current king, the current culture, and is easily turned against it because of that. And that's the machinations of the evil uncle. That's the King Arthur story. That's the story of Horus and Osiris. It's an ancient story. It's the story of Sauron, and it's there all the time. And you see in that, in rap music, in hip hop, all of that alienation being given an articulated voice in an artistic sense. And that's a good example of the power of verbal facility. And that's the route to, let's say, marketing education to young men. It's like, you want to take your rightful place in the kingdom? It's like, get your tongue straight, man. Get it under control in the highest possible sense. We went to a comedy club, Tammy and I, in New York, the Comedy Cellar. It's a great comedy club. And the last comic was an English guy. And he was not particularly physically prepossessing, and he made a lot of jokes about that, and it was quite funny. And then he divided the audience into 5 sections, and he asked each section to toss up a topic, just to yell out a topic. And they were like random topics, like the Kennedy assassination and electric lighting before 1890. Those were 2 of the topics, and the other 3 were just as diverse. And then he put on some beats, and he did about an 8-minute rap. Every verse rhymed, and he tied the whole thing together at the end and ended at the end of the music, all spontaneously. It was unbelievable. And that's logos, man. That's the redemptive power of the logos right there. The magic word, the sacred word, just manifesting itself on stage.
There's something
very impressive.
Something about that does feel dangerous as well. Not in a, I need to be concerned and this should be contaminated and walled off, but in a way that you think, that person has so much competence that it's flowing out of them, and you almost feel competent by being around them. So
you certainly feel competent by appreciating it.
Yeah.
Right? Because it speaks to the part of you that is capable of appreciating such things. You think, wow, that's really something. That's an amazing display. That's an amazing thing to see. Amazing, right? A very interesting word, amazing. And you're trapped, and you're trapped by the charisma of that. And that charisma, that's not nothing. That's a signal of something redemptive occurring. That accounts for virtually all of the attraction of hip hop and raps, the articulated voice of the struggling but worthy underclass. I suppose that's a good way of putting it. But those who are alienated from their rightful place. And so that verbal prowess is one of the ways they struggle up towards the light and that's a good example of that, of having that danger under control, because it's a dark genre in many ways, right? There's a real undercurrent and air of violence that surrounds that and its culture, like the punk movement in the UK back in the late 70s. Same sort of thing, but that capacity to express that in a poetic manner, in a compelling manner. Johnny Rotten was great at that. He was so intense. He has a song called Rise, which I used to show my clients all the time when I was starting assertiveness training with them. I'd put on Johnny Rotten's Rise, and the line in there is, anger is an energy, and he's got these unbelievably intense eyes.
Anger is an energy.
You bet. And John Lydon, man, he could channel that like almost no one I've ever seen. He'd get that anger built up inside him, And then it was completely under control, and he expressed it in his music, and he's absolutely captivating, unbelievably charismatic. And I really liked his music, that raw anger in the music. But it was in the bloody music, wasn't it? It wasn't some random riot, you know? He transmuted that into something, you know, you can argue about the poetic merits of punk rock, although I don't think you should. I mean, I Did It My Way, Sid Vicious's version of I Did It My Way. My God, that's a work of genius, that. It's so brilliantly satirical. It's known from multiple dimensions simultaneously that the system that produces happiness, let's say in the founder's sense, produces that emotion in relationship to the observation of movement towards a valued goal. And so you can derive some conclusions from that. The first is that without a goal, there's no happiness, by definition, because happiness marks movement towards a valued goal. The next is, well, the higher the goal, the more value there is in the observation of movement towards it. And so out of that, you might ask, well, then what's the highest goal? Because why don't we go for that? Well, then you could say, well, you should do your best for the best. You might say, well, that's just to make me hedonically happy. It's like, well, wait a second, you know, cocaine will work for that, because it actually even activates this system. But what about tomorrow and next week and next month? And so the problem with hedonism as a goal is, first of all, it vanishes when you're suffering. But even failing that, if you're serving yourself hedonically in the narrow sense, it's just about me and my pleasure. It's like, okay, which you? Today's you, tomorrow's you, next week's you, next month's you. What about next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? You're going to lead a hedonic and dissolute life, and what are you going to be, a burnt-out shell and a wreck, a dismal wreck in 10 years? Because that's what will happen. And so if you don't construe yourself as a community stretched out across time, then you're not even serving yourself. And if you do construe yourself as a community stretched across time, then serving other people and serving yourself turn out to be exactly the same thing. I just did a course on the Sermon on the Mount, and Christ, in one of the sections of that sermon, he says to people that you shouldn't lose your saltiness, you shouldn't lose your savor, and you're the salt of the earth, and without that salt, everything loses its flavor. And salt is a preservative, and it's a spice, and that's often conceptualized, that phrase, as referring to the salt of the earth, you know, the solid, reliable types who bear all burdens. But that is not what it means. I looked at a lot of different translations. I talked to a lot of people about that verse, and really what it means is, well, there should be some spiciness and unpredictability and humor about you. And there should be some play in the system, right? Because that's what stops you from just being the narrow, dead, past letter of the law with no spirit. There should be some snake inside the tree, right? There should be some fire inside the bush. Those are all ways of construing that are symbolically equivalent. There should be some dynamism in you, and a fair bit of that's associated with, well, enthusiasm. That's fun, but enthusiasm means to be imbued with the Spirit of God. That's why people like comedians so much too, because that's what they do. And so you have to leaven the duty with humor, and your book does a lovely job of that too, because your book, which is a very conservative book in the best possible way, and is a call to duty and responsibility, but you constantly return to themes of both stoicism and humor, which are tied together in some sense, you know. I was just in Newfoundland for the last week doing a documentary there, and Newfoundland's a rough rock, and it's beautiful and harsh. And the people there are tough and resilient, man, because they had to be. And Newfies have a great sense of humor, and they're always making fun. And that's a necessary leaven, right? That ability to deal with serious matters in a light with a light touch. And it's something I'm trying to learn to do more and more, even in the most serious of conversations, you know, because if you're a master, you've got both. You've got that light touch and that sense of humor. You really see that in military people who've been through rough situations. When you see someone in the depths of genuine suffering, hopefully what you're trying to do is to throw a lifeline. And one possible lifeline is compassion. And that's probably the right lifeline to throw an infant, you know, who's suffering. That sort of overwhelming compassion. But for someone who is an adult or making progress towards being an adult, the lifeline that might be thrown is there's something within you that would let you be more than you are, and much more, and maybe enough more so that you could actually deal with this suffering so it didn't turn into hell and take everything along with it. And there isn't anything more optimistic than that. You say something here, which I think is extremely, I'm going to read something from your book here. It is true that character is to some extent innate. I would say what that does is that it provides each of us with a range of talents and a range of temptations. And so it's something like that. So it's the hand we're dealt, and there's certainly a genetic element to that. Our genetic makeup imbues in us certain proclivities. But it is as true that character is mostly a consequence of choices. Strangely enough, we all make them, and we should make them deliberately with the knowledge that these choices are part of our responsibility toward a purpose other than our own selfish aims. That responsibility is to your family, friends, community, and country. That's something that conservatives put forward as a pathway to virtue, you know. And what's so interesting about that, as far as I'm concerned, as an antidote to atomistic liberalism, let's say, that hyper-privileges the individual, is that it's definitely been my observation as a clinical psychologist that in the depths of misery, the capability that you have to be of service to other people, your family, your friends, your community, your country, that's actually a saving grace under such circumstances. You know, and that people really find a deep and abiding meaning in that service. So it's not just finger wagging and the pointing towards duty. It's like, no, you don't understand that if you're in desperate straits, if your life is falling apart, if you're nihilistic and miserable, and maybe you have your bloody reasons, because maybe you do, that's still the case that if you step outside yourself and you try to make the lives of other people better, that's the best possible thing that you can do for yourself.